Well, okay then. It's about time we tackle this one, the film that is one of, if not perhaps the most divisive film among my cinephile groups, friends, and associates.
Ready?
You see this world? There's more work to be done.
And today we have The Boy and the Heron. Funny enough, I think a lot of people actually do know about this one. Studio Ghibli, however you want to say it, by Miyazaki and all that. I know I'm gonna get roasted in the comments for mispronunciations, but I'm gonna do my best. These films have like a very large following now in America. It isn't always the same way with like anime, or this particular form of animation, specifically anime. Like a lot of my non-nerdy friends that are out there, like this will be their kind of gateway more or less. It's like they're not going to be sitting down watching like Hunter x Hunter or like Attack on Titan or something, but they'll sit down and watch a Ghibli film for sure. But yeah, it's the newest, if based on who you ask, the latest and greatest by Hayao Miyazaki, who has been doing this for decades and decades. At first this was going to be his last film, but now I think he's already come out and said he's going to do more. It was funny because first they said it was going to be released with no marketing, and then the marketing department got a hold of him and they marketed the hell out of this movie, especially once the English voice cast was announced. And then he originally said it was going to be his like final film, but it doesn't appear to be the case. So just funny how things work. You've got to have at least heard of some of these, but the ones everybody would know him for, I think Spirited Away might be the biggest one. It's one of my favorites. It was my introduction to him. Since then, he's done many others. There's a whole list of them. You can find most of them on HBO Max. It's HBO in my heart, HBO Max. But he's done such others as, I think Howl's Moving Castle's probably the second biggest for all those romantics out there. No hate, I get it. It's got some purdy animation as well. And then I'm still debating what my favorite is. Personally, when I was a kid, I watched the hell out of Porco Rosso for some reason, but honestly, Castle in the Sky might be my favorite, but it's a toss-up up there, because I also do love Spirited Away, but you get the idea. More or less all very good films and beautiful to look at as well. So we all saw first of all, the stills, the initial teaser images. We all saw the trailer, and this appeared to be no exception. Beautiful animation. They weren't too clear about the premise, something about like a world between life and death, and mother and a fire, and this boy and a heron, and they announced some of the cast. We're like, oh, and then now here we are. Where to start with this one? I'm almost at a loss, but I think I'll gather my thoughts. Honestly, talking to people, I saw this a couple days early in IMAX. First of all, we wanted to see it, my group and I wanted to see it subbed. If you don't know, I've kind of clarified this before, but you watch it subbed, that means you're watching it with the original Japanese or whatever the original dialect may be, with, your preferred, usually English subtitles. And then there is the inverse of that, the dubbed, meaning that instead of subtitles, somebody just redubbed over the film and did English voice acting instead. Now, this can be very hit or miss because sometimes films and animation or what have you will have English dubs that are just ass, for lack of a better term. They're not good. They lack the gusto. But I will give Studio Ghibli and Hayao Miyazaki credit. Usually the English dubs are fire. Most people will hear the English dub first. There are certain animes out there and certain content where, sure, it's cool seeing it in its original Japanese, but the dubs are arguably comparable in overall quality. All that to say, I want to see it twice regardless, and a few of my friends agreed. So I wanted to see it first in its originally intended format. So we saw it on the biggest screen possible as early as we could, subbed. That was our first experience. A couple days later, I went to go see it dubbed in a smaller screen, but still large crowd of people wanted to see it dubbed, same film, but with just the English instead, which offers a different type of experience, and I'll get to that momentarily. I don't mean to paint this as too big of a picture or anything, but between friends in my circle, like friends, associates, even loose acquaintances and all that, as soon as they saw that I went to go see this, everybody started asking me, how was it? What did I think? I'm gonna go see this. What's your take on it? So I'm really humbled that so many people, maybe just a coincidence, maybe it is in the name, the movie man. I don't want to put too much stock in that. but I'm humbled and I appreciate everybody asking for my take to kind of offer a barometer of sorts. The Boy and the Heron, as the title of this video suggests, in my opinion, and this is coming from a guy who I have not seen every single Miyazaki film. I've seen a lot of them. I haven't seen every single one, so I'm operating based off of what I have seen. That being said, out of all the Miyazaki films that I've seen, I hands down think The Boy and the Heron is perhaps his most abstract of them all. It is not really what you would call a straightforward movie. I won't even go as far as to say there's a simple narrative to it. There's layers. Like, this movie, to borrow from Shrek, this movie is an onion. Even a second showing only offered minimal clarity for me. As we all knew kind of going into this, and as we saw from the trailer and what we kind of guessed, the movie's gorgeous. The animation with all of Miyazaki films is just beautiful, and like it can be bright, it can be dark, the effects, the sprites, just all aspects of the film. It's a very well animated film. It's very pretty to look at. The visuals, there are so many scenes in this film that if you just take stills, they can portray, you can just put them on canvas and throw them up in your den or your room somewhere. There were so many times that I would think, man, if I took a screenshot, if I just took a still from this scene right here, not only is it beautiful, but also there's so much to unpack in these images. Visually, there's so much in the way of storytelling, but also hidden meaning. So I don't want to get too much into cast because there is, a large ensemble. Granted, you could just say, oh, The Boy and the Heron, who starred as each one, but I'll just say that I'll display the Japanese cast here. They all did fantastic work, no qualms. And then I'll also display the English voice cast here. They also did great work, for the most part. I'll get to that. I do want to give a shout out because I'm very biased and I do love Robert Pattinson as an actor. I love seeing him push the role in the genre of whatever film that he's in. I think people are slowly actually starting to realize that he shouldn't just be remembered for Twilight, but all these better performances. When I tell you, this man, Robert put his whole pussy into this role. Dude, as soon as that first voice clip came up and it's like, your mother. Like, I was like, whoa, like, he's unrecognizable in this. And I think he, as my friend pointed out, do justice to the character of the Grey Heron in the same way that his Japanese voice actor counterpart did as well. Pros: gorgeous film, of course. All the voice cast, I think, all does a great job. An exception being, if we're gonna throw like a small con in there, I guess to start with, I'm getting all over the place here, but maybe it happened in Japanese. If it did, we didn't realize it. There's pros and cons to seeing it in English in my mind. For one, I have what I'm referring to as like cultural bias. I grew up with the English language. There's not a lot of things in life I don't do well, but when it comes to English, I have a phenomenal grasp. I use all them big fancy words, and so I'm familiar with English and kind of American, intonations and tone, just the way of speaking. So hearing the film in my native tongue kind of helped to clarify certain lines of dialogue, because this film is one of the ones where you kind of need that clarification, and it did often offer some more emotional insight and some like narrative depth on occasion throughout the film, so it did help to add some clarification in my viewing experience. That being said, sometimes the English line delivery is a bit too quick. They follow each other a little bit too quick. I don't know if it was an editing thing that they couldn't really fix in post, or they just drew scenes too close together sometimes, but sometimes delivery is a little bit off, and sometimes delivery is a little bit too quick. Maybe it was the same with the Japanese cast, but I didn't recognize anything like that. The best way that I can describe The Boy and the Heron is, don't go in with the expectations of a straight A to B narrative. I almost want to say, don't expect a classic Miyazaki flick. Like, don't go in thinking, oh, it's about the boy and this journey he goes on, and his mother, and there's a heron involved, and that's it. Like, there's so much more to it that almost takes a backseat to the rest of the film. Instead, the best approximation I can make is think about this film as you're walking through an art exhibit, basically. There's going to be a lot of different exhibits, a lot of different pieces. It's almost going to, in a very artistic sense, fall onto you to extrapolate, to interpret, and to kind of figure out what is or is not going on. I think as long as you kind of temper your expectations, and me going in a second time, having then tempered my expectations, I enjoyed my experience a bit more. But I would almost say don't go see this movie for the story or narrative, but just kind of the visual and the deeper experience there is to be had. There is a lot of visual storytelling. Nothing gets under my skin more than when you force exposition upon me, or when things are, spelled out too obviously or kind of shoved at you. I like it when a film leaves certain things up for you to kind of extrapolate, for you to interpret, for you to more or less figure out what's going on. Now, you run the risk of getting a little bit too crazy. I always reference like the third act of Men, for example. Other films of similar ilk, if you've seen the last third of that film, do similar things. I don't mind when the film can be vague, but if you get too vague, then you run the risk of getting a little bit too out there in the ether. Funny enough, that does kind of tie into my first, fairly major detraction from the film. First time I saw it, I wasn't sure what to think. I definitely knew that this isn't like your typical Miyazaki joint, and I wasn't 100% sure what happened. We all had a general understanding, but all of us were kind of left scratching our heads and asking more questions leaving the theater than even going into it. Seeing it a second time and hearing it in English and Japanese, hearing it in English kind of helped clear things up. Going in with different expectations, different set of eyes, and more context helped to clear up some of the young man's journey and let us theorize more and try to put some more pieces together. But I think some would even agree and say perhaps a bit too much of this film doesn't really answer questions and doesn't really tell you what really happened. You're just kind of tossed from situation to situation. Characters speak, sometimes they just have an answer, sometimes they don't, and things just kind of happen and just somehow work out more or less. But it's all very vague, and it's almost, by the end of it, it's almost unsatisfying. Even talking to a friend recently who despised the movie, when she kind of broke down the points for me, I understood. And all of her points, for the most part, were from a narrative perspective. And I agree. This film suffers the most in that its story is just... I almost struggle to put it into words. I don't think it's a good story. There's story there that you might be able to dig into and uncover if you try really hard. Again, some conclusions can be drawn from the information the film provides you, but a lot of what happens is up to interpretation, which is fine. It didn't enrage me so much as it did for a couple of my other friends, but I think the film suffers for it. I think it's okay to be vague and off and not really have straight answers in your movie, especially in some of Miyazaki's films, but this takes that a step or two too far, I feel. I know the critics are on their knees for this thing. They're just, I think and from what I understand, most audiences that I've kind of loosely overheard kind of feel the same. I admit I went into this film wanting to like it, and even after seeing it twice, even though I know there's detractions to it, part of me is still fighting for answers and for reasons to enjoy this film. So I don't quite know how divisive or not it's going to be yet among the general populace. From a conceptual standpoint, I really enjoyed it. But from a narrative perspective, this film really suffers a lot. Look, if you're a fan of Miyazaki's works, give it a watch. I just caution you to go into it knowing that it's not going to be a straightforward narrative. Just go into it like you're about to enter an art exhibit, and I think you'll have a different and hopefully still ideal time. It is not quite like his other works. I know some of his other works can get a little bit out there, but I think this one might have stepped the furthest out of that realm of general comfort. I do still recommend seeing it in theaters, especially in IMAX if you can, the biggest screen possible. It's one of those films where I didn't love it. I don't think it's going to make my top 10 for the year, and I wouldn't even put it in my top Miyazaki films, but it's still, if this makes any sense, it's a film that I still think you should watch just to say you've seen it, and just so we have one more opinion and take on it. As time goes on, I'll catch a couple of video essays that break it down even more, and then I'll have an even greater appreciation for it. But as it stands, it's just not what any of us, in my friend group at least, were quite expecting. But funny enough, through all that, I still recognize it for the qualities that it has, which are qualities that I do value in a film. It definitely got me talking, it got me thinking. I appreciate the film more for what it represents on a metaphorical, allegorical, visionary level. It almost works better when they don't talk in the movie. That's the funny part. The characters, cool, whatever. The story, sure, it's there, but it almost works better when you're taking in these worlds and this story the same way this young boy is. Narrative is where most of us have the biggest complaints, like character decisions, what his dad did, what he did, what they've been through, what they do or do not do. That's all, like, that's probably where the film I'm just like, yeah, I don't like much of that stuff. But oddly enough, I find myself drawn and attracted to this film. My gut instinct was to give this film, and I'll stick with this, The Boy and the Heron, I'll give it a low 4 out of 5. A low 4 out of 5. It's not what I was expecting. By the end of all of this, I'm still just kind of a little bit confused, a bit bewildered. I'm going to be thinking about this film for a while for sure, but I don't know. I recommend it, but at the same time, I'm not like, oh my god, best he's done, I love it, one of the best of the year. Like, I recognize its quality, I recognize its faults. It's definitely not a perfect film, but I'd say a low 4 out of 5 still is really good. Anyway, I know I've been talking way too long, so feel free to comment below, argue, tell me if I'm right, if I'm wrong. I'm very genuinely curious. If you have an opinion, whether it's a quick little one or a hot take or a dissertation, include it below. I'd love to engage and respond if I can. That's all I gotta say about The Boy and the Heron. Thank you guys and gals so much for watching, and stay tuned for the next episode of whatever movie I review. And goodbye, travelers.